Hi, and welcome to Network AF. On this episode, I'm talking with my friend and once collaborator and hopefully future collaborator again, Dave Belson. We're talking about data analysis, what's going on the internet, and helping people understand all that. David, could you give us a little bit of a background in what you're doing now?
Sure. So I recently joined Cloudflare, where I'm the head of data insight. Cloudflare, for those who don't know, our mission is to help build a better internet by offering a variety of content delivery, security, acceleration services. And my role right now is to help do that by using our data to communicate about what's going on in the internet. So, when something happens, an outage or changes in protocol adoption, things like that, we want to be able to communicate about it and kind of inform the industry that this is what's happening out there.
Cool. It's been interesting for me to see Cloudflare as they've grown. David Yulovich, who did OpenDNS, introduced me to Matthew back in, I think, 2009 ish. And we actually, when I was at Server Central, we actually gave the first 6 servers, I think. And then later introduced a friend of mine who became a Kentik co-founder who ran ops there, doing net-booted containerized provisioning stuff. I guess that could have been a startup, but just used for technology. And, it's been interesting to see the more product-led approach, but then, all the growth. And, it's also interesting.
Thank you for helping us get started.
No worries. But it's fascinating just to see the different approaches that you can take, not only to technology, to business, that people have there. So, back in the way back, you've been in infrastructure for a while. It's like when I started at Akamai, and I think you predated me a little
bit. Yep.
Akamai was just becoming the cool place where, the brain sucking cool place in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But you were at BBN, which used to be that place. That used to be the place everyone was like, oh, the Mecca in the sky, and, doing cool stuff, helping build the internet. Like, how did you get into networking, and how did you find, your way into BBN?
I guess I'd have to say it started in college. So I went to Stevens Institute of Technology in beautiful Hoboken, New Jersey, which is actually not as bad as people like to joke it is. But so I started there. I was a freshman in 1990. So my first exposure there was probably to BitNet. And I remember we had payphones in the hallway. And I had a friend up in Amherst College, and so he was on BitNet also. So we were like running back and forth to the payphone.
Were you on VAX or Unix or what
we had VAX cluster. Yeah, we had a VAX cluster. Yeah. And all right, try sending it to this address. Try sending it to that address. We finally got it working. So it was like, okay, this is pretty cool. And then I think somebody else showed me, anonymous FTP. So it just kind of grew from there. And this was, arguably pre-web. I do remember my first experience with the web was with the Stern line mode browser, and kind of played with it for probably 10 minutes or so. Like, this is hard to use. Like, this is not going to go anywhere.
When I was doing the planning for my ISP in '92, I started in '92, earlier '92. I tried using www, which was not line by line, but I was just like, no, Gopher is much. There's much more. Library of Congress is on Gopher. Let's do that. So I
mean, thankfully it evolved pretty quickly from there, because my bachelor's thesis was on computer mediated communication. So it was this book called The Network Nation that had been written about 20 years earlier, so in the mid 70s, and it was this projection of like,
the Network Nation or the Networked Nation?
The Network Nation.
Okay.
By Hilton Turoff. And, but it sort of predated and arguably predicted things like, Usenet and discussion boards and, all the things we take for granted these days. So my thesis was looking at all the predictions that it had made and saying, they were basically saying, they were predicting them for roughly the mid 90s. So I went and took a look at them and said, okay, how many of them have come true? So in my thesis, there's references to various news groups and to Vax notes and to fax gateways. And I look back now and I'm like, holy cow, this is, some of it survived, some of it didn't. And some of it we just don't even think about.
My personal passion is to help anybody that wants to make Usenet the basis of Web3. Where we were dealing with these same questions about moderation and that original, like, oh no, someone's wrong on the internet. That was actually Usenet that they were talking about at the time.
It's I mean, not to say that these are solved problems, but they're not new problems.
Yes.
So I think got into it that way, moved to Boston to go to Northeastern for grad school, and was casting about for a job, like an internship or something, that spring of 95, and found an ad for BBN Planet at the time. So that was their internet subsidiary looking for people to do web stuff. Yeah. They were spinning up a managed web hosting business. And I looked at the ad and I'm like, well, I've done 4 out of those 5 things. I've always wanted to learn Perl, so I'm going to apply. And then I realized it was like a bike ride away. I'm like, holy cow, the people who invented the internet are like, 2 miles from where I was living. So this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I joined there, and I think BBN was littered with ex-DEC folks, and then ultimately Akamai was littered with ex-BBN folks.
And MIT,
yeah, and of course, right.
There was the MIA board at Media Lab, CS department, which was MIA missing in Akamai. I think the week I joined Akamai, I think I was employed. They hired 200 people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, InfoSec has gotten better. I think when the network people showed up, I plopped a Wi-Fi gateway just like on a random Ethernet, just so that we could hang out with our air cards.
That was, I remember, looking at, I had pulled out at some point my algorithms book, the algorithms book, and like opened it up.
Oh, Charles Licensing.
Yep. And I was looking through the acknowledgments, and I'm like, holy cow, like 3/4 of these people that are acknowledged here work at Akamai.
Well, I remember it was funny. Like the second week I was at Akamai, Charles came up to me and was like, Avi, did you know that the triangle inequality does not hold on the internet? I'm like, you mean that going indirectly can be faster than going directly along the hypotenuse? He's like, yes, exactly. It's like, oh, okay, yes, I do know that. Frequently, we set static routes to go around, peering when we were at Nanog, and we need to get to our own networks. Like, so I am aware of that. But it was just interesting, the different cultures. You had to have had a computer science background if you wanted to be a network person working at Akamai, so you could communicate with people.
And that realization ultimately turned into a product, or I guess not a product, but a feature.
It was a feature of the platform, and then got pulled out. But Bruce Maggs was the coolest. I had my BlackBerry, and I had hacked the email client to send me something which Procmail would use to do folders and that without running Exchange. Okay. And then he got the code. I gave him the code, and then he made it like, he encrypted it, just to like, it was like, hey, I can still code too. It's like, yeah, awesome. The network group actually started inside the engineering for a little bit before growing out of it. So data analysis, and I'm going to say analysis, we can talk about what insight means, because there's data and then there's making sense of it. Right. How did you get into that from more tech hands-on work and even sales engineering effectively and producting at Akamai?
Yep. Yeah. So that was the path I had come through, was sales engineering, and then into the product team. And I was working for Brad Rinklin, a CMO at the time, and he called me to his office one day, and he's like, shows me this presentation and says, hey, we've been thinking about this, and we've got a lot of, we collect a lot of data. We've got a lot of, I shouldn't say collect, but the Akamai services throw off a lot of data exhaust.
We call it the mapping fumes. The fumes from mapping the internet.
Basically, and it's like, we should try to do something that we can give back to the community with it. Mm-hmm. Okay, let me go take a look. So I took the presentation, thought about it, and there was some, we came up with some ideas about connection speed, connection quality, outages, things like that. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. Now I got to figure out, where am I going to find this data? Like, where does this live in Akamai? And somebody, it might have been you, I don't remember, but said, hey, there's this team here that does data analysis. I was like, okay. So they connected me with a couple of folks on the team. Went to talk to them, and they said, "Oh yeah, we analyze it this way and this way, and give me sort of the menu." And so we started out with a couple of things. The first, it was ultimately what grew into the state of the internet.
Right.
The first issue that we did back in Q1 2008, I think didn't even have connection speed data. It was more like, I don't even know why we did it. It was like IP. I think it was something to do with the number of IP addresses we saw by geography, like but per capita. So I think the notion was, where were we seeing sort of more internet adoption, as a proxy for adoption, on a geographic level. And I think that and then also I think we started looking at connection speeds, but in aggregate, we defined, I think, what was it called? Low band? I forget what it was called, but looking basically like dial-up percentages, and then broadband percentages, and then what we called high broadband, which I think at the time was like 10 megabits. And then as we evolved the report, we also evolved along with the FCC definitions of broadband.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Back in 2000, we got approached. Actually, they wanted to go meet with Danny, but Richard Clark met with me, and I showed him the knock, and was maybe a little visionary, describing what some of our capabilities were to analyze the data. And then 6 months later, there was a Booz Allen came in. For it. There was a presidential tasking order to get a synoptic view of the internet from some guy named Avi. So we figured that out. But now, obviously, Akamai never looked at customer data, but looking at the internet and name servers. And actually, at the time, everyone was worried about the authoritatives. I was worried about the resolvers. If those are on any casted, don't have enough capacity, then no one can resolve and get to websites. And so, we had some of that going for trying to understand things and protect. And so eventually, State of the Internet wound up having some security in terms of attack and DDoS, some performance. Yep. I know, I apologize. When Kentik was starting, we talked about adding a trends in traffic, and now we have Doug doing that. But we never quite got that going. But we incorporated a little bit. I had incorporated what was it called, internet events and outages, I think, where using the aggregate traffic data, we were able to show when there was an outage, or shut down in a given country. And I remember Doug and I, when he was at Renesas, we bounced things off of each other. Okay, we just saw this weird, traffic shift here or here. Did you see the same thing in BGP or vice versa? We also looked at, I think it was real. I got my first taste of like how real world events, not outages, but actual events can be seen through traffic. So I think it was the Obama's first inauguration. We were able to look at probably streaming traffic on the platform. Mm-hmm. And we were able to chart and show that as the inauguration went on, traffic went up and up and up. And then I think as soon as he finished speaking and the poet laureate took over, started, like the traffic just fell off a cliff. And it was sort of interesting to see that. And I think we also had looked at e-commerce traffic, aggregate e-commerce traffic at the time as well. And you could see e-commerce traffic dropping as the inauguration went on. And then at some point, as the inauguration finished, e-commerce traffic came back up. 20 years ago, it was Steve Jobs and Victoria's Secret, but you didn't compare those events to those. Those were no longer.
I know. I was, I'm trying to think if I was even there at that point. I must have been, but I think I was busy being an SC and not paying a lot of attention to that side of the house. Yeah,
no, that was, I mean, I had started in October. I guess you started in May. So, no, that is, it's funny. I'll just share one story. So when, in the 90s, I got confused as a sysadmin trying to understand networking. I just started teaching people about BGP, and people are like, oh, what's this question about XNA? X25, SNA and X25 and Apple Talk, and how do you do all this stuff? It's like, I don't have a CCIE. They're like, but you have to have a CCIE. It's like, but they would, I don't. I mean, I know some stuff and I can talk about it, but at Akamai, I felt like an imposter because I would go out and I sort of understood how websites are built, and I know coding and I know sysadmin, and I knew what Akamai did, but I couldn't, tell you how to do it with metadata and all that. And I remember, because you were a technical consultant, it was sales engineering basically. And I remember when Danny took over the product group, he made all the product people take the
the test. Yes.
And Danny was like, "Oh, you'd be able to do it fine." I'm like, "Danny, no, you have no idea." Like, no, I just bullshit well, and like I have the connected understanding of what you can do, but I wouldn't know
enough to be dangerous, and you know enough to be dangerous, and you have the confidence to talk about it. I think
right. That's the thing. I tried to explain to people like you can do it too. Like you don't have to go do all that. But so I mad props because I saw that TC master test and I was like, that's.
Really I remember. I think I was a TC manager by the time we started doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the only recollection I have of it was flying to. It was a hotel somewhere, like all the TC managers came together in a hotel somewhere that Evan had insisted was halfway between the East Coast and the West Coast. It was like a 2-hour flight from San Francisco, like a 5-hour flight from if that's possible.
Right.
And I remember that I was smart enough to make my section multiple choice. So I was done marking my section in a matter of hours. Yeah. But there was, I forget who it was, one of the other TC managers had made theirs basically like an essay or multiple essay questions.
Yeah, no, that's
so they were stuck I think they literally pulled an all-nighter to get it all marked. But yeah, that was that was a big thing at Akamai.
Yes.
I don't know if they still do it or not.
But I guess I don't know. I don't know either. But I guess the underlying point is, even if you're not, we wouldn't say master anymore, but even if you don't have complete familiarity with the material, if you put your head into it and start banging your head against it, like what you're doing right now, that was how Jim did it by learning, and I did it by learning, and then Jim Cowie at Renesas taught Doug and answered his questions, and I remember you certainly had the attention of the network group and other people who were supporting.
That's been the great part is having those folks around me that can help. I know that I can't do it myself, and I've never claimed to. But building that group of that support team who has access to the data, who has the ability to write those big hairy SQL queries, and then can explain to you, okay, here's why what you think you're looking for is not what you're looking for, and we should approach it this other way. So helping me think that way. And I think maybe even more importantly, treating me as an equal. I think that is one of the things I found at both BBN and Akamai was that there were people there who were infinitely smarter than me.
Yes.
But were willing to have that conversation with me as an equal. I think for me, that's one of those really important things.
I laugh, not because I think that everyone's infinitely smarter, or just more accomplished. Like you look at people that have done such foundational things, you're like, I could never do that. And the truth is you probably could if that's what you really wanted to do, but it would take time.
You have the focus and
no, generally I would say, all I know is people that worked at BBN, and I was only there a couple times, but Aaron Block, who went to Akamai, told a story about challenging John Curran, who now runs Aaron, and not letting him in the knock because he didn't have his badge and was dressed in jeans and whatever. And he thought he was going to get fired, because I've challenged the CTO of the company. And John's like, hey man, that's what
the rules say. That's what the rules say.
I can't do the Boston accent, but hey man, that's what you're supposed to do. So, you mentioned collaboration outside the company. I've seen this in networking overall, where there's often co-opetition. It sounds like you've had an okay time of even people where in some sense you could be competing for the scoop or just generally competing, collaborating with. Is that because there's something different, or because everyone has their different take on it? Like, what would you say?
I'd say yes. Yes to both of those, where I think different organizations or companies are often collecting different data sets. They may be similar in nature, but slightly different. And I think maybe we're all competing in some sense, but we also all want to get it right if we're going to put something out there. So one of the challenges is often when you see something particularly anomalous in your graphs, knowing, is that a thing or is that a database burp?
Yeah, there's bugs.
Did something get written into the database twice for some reason, or not at all for some reason? And figuring out, okay, we saw this, in my company, and this other, contact in this other company saw it another way. So I think that's, we all want to do the right thing. And I think it's yes, we all want to be first to post about it. But I think we also all want to be confident in what we're posting. Is that the delicate balance of speed versus accuracy?
Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense. So I guess you could almost have, maybe that would be a fun combo blog post for you and Doug, and like the set of things that could be the noise, which might make you think their signal from, as you said, double writing to not writing to, the early Keynote stuff where agents would DOS themselves and you'd be trying to debug it, and it turns out it was just an agent that scheduled everything to run at the same time, to bugs in the software, to that do the telemetry, to I don't know, any other fun categories of missed anomalies.
I don't know. I think that the challenge, I think one of the big challenges right now continues to be geolocation. Mm-hmm. So it's when you find those anomalies, figuring out, where they really occurred. Yes, they occurred on the internet or in a network somewhere, but trying to tie that back to the real world.
Any geolocation that updates once a day is always wrong. It's generally not. It's generally fuzzy anyways.
Right. You're only going to get so good, but the level of granularity that I think we tend to want is really not available at that, in that technology space.
Yeah. Not unless you're in your Tesla, or IoT, or, other things where, and even then it could be proxied through, but then again, there's latency techniques to help see that. So
yeah, that's always been a really foundational piece of what so many of us are doing. And I think it's one of those parts of the industry where there hasn't been enough innovation. There hasn't been a lot of light shone on it.
And we have this as a product challenge at Kentik too, where if you're not careful, you can see something that's data and it is an answer to the question that you asked, but the question you asked may not be the question you think you were asking, because computers, of course, are very literal in what they do. So you gotta really think about that accurately, and before you draw conclusions. But then you also have to take what's going on in the digital world and try to turn it into what's going on in the physical world, where the infrastructure may not be what you think it is. And as it sounds like, there's also research not into the unique data set that you might have, and not just collaborating or corroborating with others things that are seen, but can it be hard to track down sort of what's the digital footprint of something that you think is happening online?
That is a big issue, and it's easy to see the change in the graph. But to your point, it's much harder. In many cases, I should say, it's much harder to tie that back to what ultimately caused that change in the graph. In some cases, we know that it's election time in a country that's got a history of messing with the internet, or that there was a big storm, a big typhoon in this country, and or well-publicized power outages somewhere. Right. And so you can oftentimes say, okay, we know there's a typhoon that just made land in this country. Oh, look, internet traffic or the routes or recently whatever.
Tonga, right?
Exactly. Yep. But even that, it was, I'm trying to remember which came first, like the recognition that the internet had fallen off, or the fact that people saw the volcano erupt. But yeah, so in those large scale cases, it is often a fairly short path between, changing graph and identification of real world event. I think it's in the smaller cases, the more localized cases, where we're seeing something that occurs on a particular network, or we're seeing something in a state or a city. And that's where you really, I think, have to go sleuthing and trying to find, news articles or social media or things like that. When I was, after Oracle, when I was doing the Internet Disruption Report blog, I would try to track down a lot of those sorts of outages and disruptions I saw.
Localized, regional.
Yeah, and the challenge was that I'd see, using various tools, I'd see, the traffic dropped on this particular network. So I'd go try to find out, what happened. I'd say, oh, good, AviNet has a Facebook page. And then I look at the Facebook page and say, yeah, but they haven't posted since 2007. So it was, and they have the Twitter account, but it's never been used.
Right.
So it's one of those things where some of the providers are really good about posting status updates or about replying to inquiries. There were a bunch of times I had to explain, no, actually, I don't live in Tonga. I'm living outside the country and trying to understand what caused this problem on your network that I observed. But that's, you can't always find the root cause or some semblance of a root cause.
It's interesting though that it's a hybrid. Needing to go beyond, just the data that we see from internet senses and fumes sometimes to figure out what the root cause is. And even just, especially something you mentioned and something that, comes up a lot in anomaly detection, something isn't there that usually is. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. That can be, again, even like if the Beltway in DC is not busy on a Monday morning and it's not a holiday, then that's probably really bad. Unless it's COVID, in which case, I guess we understand.
And especially when we're analyzing traffic shifts for things like outages and disruptions, it's understanding how do you tell when something is not like it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And figuring out, do you compare it to just that time the past day, or what Mondays are usually like, or and there's all the accounting. But it's XYZ Monday and it's a holiday, so that's why it's down. But the alerts are still triggering anyway because traffic's not where it's supposed to be. That's a hard problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of operational products you have to work in seasonality and things like that, and to some extent you can use humans a little bit to help with that too. You have data, you can analyze it, making sure that the data actually is complete and you're asking the right questions. Try to correlate it. You corroborate it with other people doing data analysis, and then you have to explain it. Right. And one of the issues I always have is I always need to have this little Avi saying, no, give the idea of the answer. Don't lecture about like every little thing, but no one cares about this BGP thing, and isn't that fascinating about how meds work, and like you have to tell a story, and how do you go about that? Well, you think something has happened, you have these reasons to believe it technically and how it correlates, but you have to up level that and explain it, or as we say inside Kentik, the so what. But they need to understand it and then put that into context. So how do you go about that?
Yeah, the so what's important, because throwing up a page with a pile of graphs is interesting to some set of people, but if you really want to get somebody to understand what's happening, or more importantly, why it's happening, that's what you need to get to. And I think you need to be careful. You need to be careful around not going too far into the weeds, like you just said. I think it really depends on what you're trying to show. Sometimes you can, set up the thesis and show the chart, the graph, explain what it shows, and then talk about the impact of it. So I think that's one of the things that oftentimes we maybe do a mixed job of doing among the community of folks who follow the internet outages and shutdowns is, yes, this happened here, but what was the impact? What did it mean that all these folks were cut off from the internet for an hour or for a month or for whatever it is? I think that bringing it into the personal, I think helps provide that context for it.
Right. Or early COVID, poor performance, low bandwidth means you can't work and have kids get educated, and that's a problem. Right.
Yeah. And that was a big, that was a big thing. And I think many of us, are in a position where we don't think about that. We've got our, multi-hundred megabit connection from, our local cable or telecom provider.
And phone backup, 2 phones backups. I've got Sprint and Verizon, and I'll go and
You're way more advanced than I am, but but there are still those kids who are taking their laptops and sitting outside a McDonald's or a library or something like that. We don't always think about that, but those are the stories where that's the kind of stuff where data can help tell that story and say, hey, connection speeds in this geography are not to the point where they need to be able, both upload and download to enable, Zoom learning or Google Meet learning or Zooms or Meets for work or whatever.
So in your career, I also guess recently and, over time, have you dealt much with press and analysts, or is it more marketing? So any tips for building relationships and making it more natural and not I have this thing which I want you to promote my company for me?
Yeah, no, I think I think the important thing there in building those relationships is demonstrating expertise. So not only personally, because that's what gets them coming back, but also for the company or the organization that you represent. These may be no-brainers, but it's the kind of thing where if you've shown that, hey, we as this organization have this kind of insight, in Cloudflare, we have this sort of insight into what's happening on the internet, and I can represent that in a way that you can understand and that you can then explain to, use as context or explain to your readers or your audience. I think that's the way you build the relationships and you get them coming back that way. I think part of the challenge there, though, is instantiating those relationships. So obviously that's what PR teams are there to support. But I think having an active and intelligent social presence as well, it really helps there, because I think a lot of times the journalists will say, hey, this person's been out there tweeting or LinkedIning on a particular topic, and I'm going to reach out to them to see if they can provide some data or some commentary on this internet event that just happened.
So does it mean you could, once you choose your profession that you're in, you can never change your cell phone number?
Isn't that what Google Voice is for?
I guess.
Keep the cell phone numbers forever.
That's why I have 4 Google Voice numbers from different numbers that I thought I would never change. So,
No, I've had mine since this particular one I've had since the early Akamai days. That's why I know those spam calls, because the call will come in from the 617 prefix to 617, and I'm like, it's unlikely to be any of the 3 people I know that probably still have an early Akamai cell phone, so I'm just going to let it go to voicemail.
So surprising they don't give you the option to block the NPA NXX or send it, that your phone is in. But
I'd love to do that, especially my home phone, which I look at. 99% of the calls we get.
Say that once again. What did you say? What kind of phone do you have? You mean the cell phone on your desk at home? Is that what you're talking about?
The cordless phone sitting in my kitchen.
The 911 Anchor. So
it comes with FiOS.
Right. I guess I technically have a Comcast phone. That
it's the number I still give out in many cases, because I don't really want spam calls on my cell phone. So I just if you don't really need my phone number, I'm giving you my home phone number.
Oh wow. Okay.
That's just easier to ignore.
Okay. I just get a Google Voice, and you get the hilarious transcripts. There must be there's the people of Walmart. There must be like a hilarious transcripts from voicemail transcripts website somewhere. I need to take a look for that.
If not, it's an opportunity.
Yeah. So another thing that I've done that I think has been helpful over time is if I'm talking to someone from whether it's press or maybe an industry analyst and we're not the source, point them to someone that might be. In fact, that's not how Doug got hired at Kentik, but he was at Oracle and someone wanted data. Well, it was COVID was going on. People wanted data about the traffic side that they weren't seeing and, pointed it over. And ultimately it helps build a relationship where, you're not always trying to promote. You're just like, hey, I can introduce you to someone who actually really knows that I think I know, but I don't really, whether it's an expert or someone with data, could be really helpful too.
Absolutely. No, it's actually a great point too, is knowing what you don't know and knowing who probably knows it. And I think it's also to that point, it's a great way to build the relationships with not only the press and the analyst community, but those back end folks.
Yeah.
Referring between organizations.
Yeah, definitely. It's tough in what we do, and I talk with Doug about this also, because sometimes the things that make the best stories, we're not hoping that they will happen. We're not hoping there will be more. We're not hoping for COVID. We're not hoping for internet shutoffs. I don't even know what adjectives to use to describe some of the stuff that's going on today. But with that as backdrop, I will ask, what's the favorite story, that you've worked on, helped with?
It was actually not a
trauma. Okay.
No, it was not an internet event story. A call had come into Akamai PR, and they said they're looking for somebody to talk about submarine cables. And so the PR team turned to me and said, "Hey, can you talk to them about this?" I think it was, I want to say it was for the Atlantic. I don't remember offhand. But I said, yeah, I'll talk to them. I should be able to answer the questions. And so we were talking about, submarine cables and how they work. And we started talking about, how they're protected from damage. And I was talking about how, sometimes the shacks where they come ashore, sometimes they're, data centers with armed guards and so on. And the cables themselves have, multiple layers of sheathing and so on. I said, but there are no sharks with lasers down there or anything like that. And it was an offhanded comment. Didn't realize that I was channeling Austin Powers until after the fact. And then the article got published, I think the next day or the next week or whatever it was. And the headline was something to the effect of like, "No sharks with lasers." I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe they did that. And the PR team is never going to let me talk to a reporter again. But luckily the Akamai PR team had a good sense of humor, and it was like, yep, cool, no problem.
Well, at Kentik, it's funny you mentioned the Atlantic, because I, again, with when COVID was going on, I talked with Charles Fishman, and I really like the narrative, the people that tell stories. The news is important, but it's really fun to read someone's take when they're really weaving it into a story. And
it makes it more personal.
It was entertaining when I worked with some of that in the 90s, but then during COVID, this article almost starts with a quote from me. It's like, "Oh my God," says Avi Freedman, which is not, I don't talk like that, but he what was it? He said, so it's, "Oh my God, it would be all over," says CEO.
I remember that article
about, it's like, what if the internet died? It's like, I don't even remember saying that, but I'm sure it's true. But it's not that we go around alarmist, but
right.
There's, I don't, you can ask questions and then get responses, and that's it's interesting. So I guess that's up there with some of the telecosm stuff that I was in, where I think that
was a while ago.
I probably said it, but it was taken out of context when I said that Bob Metcalf was an elder statesman doing more harm than good. That was when he said the internet was going to go, or like be destroyed.
Well, right at that point in time, yeah.
And then he called me a brash young brat wet behind my ISP brat wet behind my packets, and I was like, okay, whatever. But I wasn't trying to pick a fight. It was just George Gilder just thought that he took this thing which was about. I just thought it was bullshit. I thought, BGP had all these problems, and we can skip the technology.
It was clickbait or whatever.
Yes, it was clickbait at the time. It wasn't like top 10 things that will kill the internet, but it was still. But maybe I'll have to see if I can get sharks with lasers in there somewhere. Or submarines with wire cutters. Or I remember Doug
It's more likely
Humphrey's
these days.
description of of birds as 2-year-olds with wire cutters, super smart, just going around and cutting things. So
I've heard that one.
what's the most, do you have any favorite question you've been asked, or
I think probably when I was doing State of the Internet and doing the interviews for that, we'll talk to a lot. Each quarter we come out with, hey, here are the new rankings, here's who's fastest.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times press would ask, reporters would ask, hey, the US invented the internet, how come we're not the fastest? And it was sort of this interesting, like, okay, let me explain capitalism to you and why the big telecom providers are not going to invest in bringing fiber everywhere, if they don't have a clear ROI for it. And, it was, as opposed to other countries where the government has said,
yeah, I would say if the government decides it's important, then they supplement. Yeah.
Yeah, if there's a mandate or support, in other countries, the government has said, thou shalt, bring speeds, connections with speeds of X to every, house or apartment or whatever. And oh, by the way, here's money to help do it. In some of these cases, the telecom there also spun out of the government. They used to be the state-backed telco, and then they became independent, but the government said, we're going to help you do it.
Some take it from a view of a human right, and some view it as a strategic, they just make a strategic bet economically. Europe a little bit more human right historically, Asia a little bit more economic, but that's not clear cut true either, and often it's for both.
Right. And especially the US with the geographic challenges also just in running high speed connectivity.
I was in Brazil for 14 hours once when I was at Akamai, and requested I come down and talk with Embratel, and we got the result that we wanted bandwidth wise, but getting into the wilds of Brazil with radio into the is even more challenging.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to run fiber everywhere.
Yeah, in the US, there, wherever you're going, basically, eventually there would have been fiber. Maybe that wasn't clear in 1996, but would eventually be needed. So, are there any questions that you, I won't say hate, but are not as much a fan of that you get a lot?
Not really. I mean, I think that they're all asked with good intention.
Right.
Foundational. Maybe I don't always have the answers to them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. As you do the analysis, I'm curious because Cloudflare has done some really cool stuff with the Learning Center. We've been doing a lot of work in that regards too at Kentik. I've been super impressed with that. You could take a look at it. You can learn about BGP and DDoS and all sorts of things. And then also Radar, which I think predated when you joined, but it's interesting. And of course, Sidexis has done some stuff, and other people have done things, but Cloudflare has done a pretty good job of making it interactive. Any grand plans or vision for your work will work with that?
Yeah, so that's one of the parts of my role is to help evolve Radar. I think with the Internet Society when they launched it and saw it, I was like, oh my God, this is what I've always wanted to launch. Something which just brings together a whole lot of insight about various bits and pieces of the internet. So I think we're working on thinking about what does the future of Radar look like? What additional content and data sets can we incorporate into it? Thinking about cycle times. What needs to be real-time-ish, what can be updated, daily or weekly or, whatever the case may be. And of course there's all the figure. Then once you kind of think about all that, thinking about the core data analysis piece. Okay, we want to do all this, but you have the data at this sampling level, and then you want to look at it in all these different ways. There's all this cardinality to it. We don't want to build something that's going to make the the underlying systems explode. So thinking about that, and then thinking about also not only the Radar tool itself, but I'm also working on plans for regular reports. So how do we take like, for instance, they've got the quarterly DDoS report at Cloudflare. How do we take that and then build that out for other similar areas? And then are there other sort of longer form content pieces that we can put together that are data driven?
Interesting.
Stay tuned, I guess, is the ultimate answer.
Okay. We'll see if we can convince the Cloudflare marketing department to link to the resources we're building there. But again, complimentary, but it's very cool what you all have done. Look forward to it. We're thinking about tools and looking glasses and all that. But
yeah.
I think you've probably had to deal with some of these issues again, maybe before you started. There's also a limit to how much you can show because we all have a duty to protect confidentiality and PII, customer data. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and doing it all with always doing all of this with aggregate data.
Yeah. Yes, please never say anonymized because you can't really anonymize. Obfuscated, aggregate, those are all things you can do. And then ultimately, when I talk with academics, I'm just like, look, state of the art is you eyeball it and a human makes an opinion about, could someone reasonably, you joked about AviNet, but yeah, I mean, I have multi-home networks and you could, if someone has one prefix and it's a BGP thing on the internet, and you have any source of major CDN or network, you could tell whether they're home or not if you want to rob them or do something else. At some level you can't, but a pretty broad understanding that IP addresses and things are PII and even in many ways aggregates. So anything you would love to see the internet data and analysis and storytelling community do this year, near future that we haven't been?
I mean, I'd like to get back to seeing people again, getting out of my house. I think that there's definitely some good conferences that go on around that, like the Internet Measurement Conference. So that one is, I think, arguably more academic, but trying to bring together. I'd done this once at Akamai. I had tried to bring together an inside baseball for internet measurement. With Doug and some of the Renesas folks and some of the Maxmind folks because they were local, and I forget who else was there.
Did that once. Also.
Well, Don used to do the DNS inside baseball.
Right. Okay.
I think Kyle helped support the effort that I did. But I think maybe something where it's folks who are not quite so academic, and figuring out how we can do a better job across the industry of sharing insights and potentially sharing data, if that's a practical thing. Love to maybe see the industry come together, and this is probably an uphill battle, but like maybe some common data formats, to be able to say, so that there's some trusted third party, an internet society like party where everybody can say, here's our data about XYZ. And it's, so they can aggregate it from Kentik and from Cloudflare and from Akamai and from whoever else has those sorts of measurements, and provide a more comprehensive view of what's going on.
Well, I have been involved in the recent CADA conferences, and it's tough. It's a tough problem. The thing I've been pushing on that I really would love to see is subject to being able to do so in privacy respecting ways, have some understanding of relative importance of IP address ranges, prefixes, because often people look at, BGP is the thing which everyone can look at, but they assume that every prefix is created equal, or as you were saying, per capita traffic per IP address or whatever.
Right.
And, where we might start is there are some algorithms that let you take some traffic on a part of a network plus the topology and sort of deduce, and maybe again, with customer buy-in, we could validate some of those models. And then that helps people, use that. Maybe we could, validate that, with Kentik customer buy-in. And then the academics can use that for other, for other purposes, but it's a tricky problem. And then reproducibility, or the word longitudinal, which means, sort of over time, also, is something that the academic folks are working on, but, keep all the data for paper. Now, if Kentik does something where the result is privacy respecting, but the data underneath might not be, then again, that becomes a challenge. But let's just say trace route data not involving any private agents. So I get some VPSs and I'm just trace routing from Linode, now Akamai, to DigitalOcean and IBM, to name three, three that I like. That's not, there's no issue there. That data could be, that data could be archived, and Ripe does that with their data. And, those are things being actively looked at too. Now, the scope of the data is pretty large, but then again, cloud lets you do, if you have money, do stuff with pretty large data pretty fast. So, any wish list for internet infrastructure, or industry folks, not the data sharing side, over the next year or two?
I don't know. Let's see. I think that, hopefully, government stops shutting down the internet. I'd love to not have to focus on that, and
makes good stories, but that's not how we want to get good stories.
Yes, absolutely. As far as the infrastructure side, looking forward to the results of the efforts in the U.S. to help fund improved broadband deployment. I'd like to be able to get back to doing another connection speed, connection quality focused report. So, just to see ultimately the impact of those investments.
That'd be great. We're thinking about what we can do at Kentik to help people along the RPKI journey. If you're a customer, we have a whole workflow about it. Like, see, this is what will drop if you turn on validation of different, by different types. But how could we even do that in an open way? We have some open source stuff that actually does traffic analysis and could plug in and help people with that. And then I'd love to see us get to path validation. I'm glad we started, and it's we have customers that are working, in fact, transit some of the big wholesale networks that are customers that are focusing on BCP 38, forward source address violation, which isn't the primary problem, but it is used in DDoS, is used volumetrically, and or just people that have open reflectors. Sometimes we get put in an awkward position where someone's like, "Hey, Kentik, can you tell your other customer, they're bad and you need to do this?" But there's ways we can do it and say, "Look, we have these dashboards and we have to notice this," but then there's only so pushy we can be. But at the same time, it's a little embarrassing as an infrastructure person that we've had these issues with the infrastructure we've known about them well for 20 years. We've had them for forever, 30 years. But, that was originally the design was I could tell that to a mail server and send mail to you from God. And that was like, but it's ASCII. But as the internet becomes more production ready, it's time that we dealt with these things. So
I will admit to having done something like that a few times, probably.
That was how it still is too much of a guild system, which I've talked about with other guests and we won't get into, but the way I was forced to reverse engineer that was I got email from God. And I was like, how did that happen?
Wait a minute.
I don't think I went to shul last week. So and then I was like, wait, let me look at the protocol. That used to be the way that people did it. And so it's nice that we have much more education, some of the books behind me that you can actually.
I've been looking at them, trying to figure out which ones I have. I think I have a couple of them, but not a lot of them.
Do you have a Telebit Trailblazer modem? That was I didn't use Bitnet. I was using UECP. So you got to.
I don't, unfortunately. I do have my bin of early internet ephemera, like my Netscape transistor radio, and
somewhere I have long software, TCP/IP software, and buttons.
I have my collection of eight floppy disks to install CompuServe, and although I started making little boxes out of those. I have a lot of that kind of stuff that I really probably should throw out. I also have a computer.
No, send it to me. I'll buy it.
I think you still have my Vectrex, actually.
I do. Yes.
It doesn't work, but you have it.
Yes.
I do. I have a complete set of Wired magazines actually as well. Although they've gotten thinner and thinner and thinner over the years,
Yes.
which is makes me sad. But I think next year is 30 years for them. So I have this grand vision of somehow finding enough free time each month to go through,
Oh yeah, that'd be cool.
that month's historical issue. And I don't know if it's look at the articles, or for me, it's probably less the articles, more the ads.
Yes.
And look at, what companies are not around anymore, what's happened to these companies, even during the conversation today, referencing so many companies that just don't exist anymore.
I have news for you. I want to do that with Byte Magazine, which I have multiple complete collections of. And I bet you could do the same thing with Byte, where they were talking about networking and risk computing and AI and all this stuff. And you could, not the companies, but more the ideas. And you could say, we're still.
Well, you were either in or on the cover of Wired, right?
Yeah. So that was funny for Sealand, when we were doing Haven Co. So I went to
an airport where I saw that. And I was like, wait a minute, I know him.
Well, Gail was too, to be fair. So, so I visited one of my VC's partners and loaned him an IMSI, which I think he still has. Or I forget, was it Altair? No, it was an Altair, not an IMSI. He saw my storage area, which Gail calls Amos, Avi's Museum of Shit. And along one wall were unopened boxes. Gail's attitude is, what kind of moron buys a box and buys something and doesn't open it? And but this VC, he got me. He was like, that's so awesome. You have like an infinite supply of Christmas presents. It's like things you will love because you bought them for yourself that you can open. And so I was like,
when you open them, they lose value.
But when I went to his office, he had the complete set of Wired, and I was like walking over to the 2000. He's like, I get people to do that, because he has people, he knows people that have been around for a while. So we'll get Kentik on there. We've been in Wired from Doug's work, but we'll get Kentik. Hopefully it could be Doug. It doesn't need to be me, on the cover. So we'll get that. But if you before you consider throwing them out, let me know. It's like I have a
I will probably keep them.
Of every Sun workstation up to the 4500, every Sun, including a Sun 2, up to the 4500, but not the E10K in Virginia, that someone donated to me because his wife was like, it's like, I'll pay the
out
storage.
Of the house now.
I'll pay the storage. Yes. So last question. Well, second to last question. Any advice you would give your younger self, whether it's entering BBN or in college or?
I think probably two things. I think one would have been useful for college and beyond, which is to get my hands dirtier. I think a lot of the folks that I've interacted with in the industry have had the opportunity to manage a network, or like you've said on past episodes, talking about breaking things, breaking the internet. I've never gone to that point of really, configuring a network or doing something with routing. I've got a CS degree, but have not really kept up my ability to code. I definitely wish I'd done a better job there over the years. I think the second piece, probably professionally, is wish I had found a mentor earlier on, and really, had somebody who could help me, figure out what I was doing, help guide me, into maybe new areas. Help introduce me to the right folks. I think I've done a great job of building a network. I think, that places I've been have been fantastic for that. But somebody, with a little bit more experience and knowledge helping kind of push me in a given direction, I think would have certainly been useful as well.
It can be difficult because when you're earlier in career, you sort of think of, you're learning the environment, you need to ask permission.
Yeah.
And then hopefully you're in a company, which is a separate topic, how to interview to make sure you're in a company where people are approachable and like what you experienced at BBN and Akamai. And to show, interest. It's not, you don't have to be, I know Cloudflare used to use the term ninja. I don't really like, the 10X and ninja and wizard, but, you don't have to be the most super wizard who created the universe. If you're curious and learning, people generally in the field want to help you, but people often come from an environment where where it's more hierarchical, whether it's family, cultural, whatever. So separate topic. How do we encourage that? Something I talked about on the last podcast with someone. So
yeah, and I don't have a complex home network. I don't have a rack in the basement, where I need to set up separate subnets and whatever. It's like, so I just have whatever the stock FiOS install is,
yeah.
and so I'm not even I'm not even trying to get my hands dirty with doing something weird with that.
Well, but it could be learning about anything, and sometimes the people. Well, I guess the other thing is that you let your nerd passion fly about different topics. It's a way of connecting. Yeah. It doesn't have to be the thing that someone is most connected about. I remember, I don't know, 10 or probably 15 years ago at Nanog, I was watching one of the great ones, Steve Bellovin, the original Cheswick and Bellovin firewall book and Bell Labs, and I was like hovering as one does. He was talking about something suitably nerdy to some other people, and then he turned to me. He's like, "So Avi, my son thinks that I'm not enough of a nerd because of you." And I was like, "Oh, okay. I didn't know he knew who I was. I didn't know he knew who I was. I guess maybe he saw an analog presentation or something, and then I didn't." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" He saw me play. His son saw. Or no, they're playing poker on ESPN, for the World Series, and it was like, hey, geeks can do that. And I guess Steven said he's a nerd, he does internet stuff. And so, there's many things you can, connect about and talk about. So
absolutely. Yeah. I think I often describe myself as sort of a mile wide and inch deep. Mm-hmm. So I think that helps me, I know enough to be dangerous in many cases. And, but that does help me have the conversations with a variety of different people across the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So how can people find you if they, have something they're curious about, have a tip?
Best way to find me probably is dbelson, DBELSON on Twitter, or I have my website, which collecting links to what I've written and stuff. That's dbelson.com. So probably the best two ways to find me out there.
Okay, cool. And I'm Avi Freedman on Twitter and LinkedIn, and avi@kentik.com. And thanks all for listening to Network AF podcast. If you like it, please subscribe and tell others. And David, thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.